Again, please, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. And we would like to hear your presentation titled, "This Should Not Happen."
Okay, thank you, Professor Rajhi. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to make this presentation full of stories so it doesn't cause any sleepiness among the audience. As I mentioned in the first lecture, that the current medical ethics started after Nuremberg. And what Nuremberg was that during World War II, the idea for the physicians who were caring for soldiers that were fighting in freezing conditions outside, they tried to see what the physiological changes that happen during freezing and how can they be mitigated for those who are exposed. So what they came up with an idea that we can use prisoners of war, and they put the prisoner of war into a freezing area, and they try to draw blood and see what happens to his blood, what happens to his coagulation, and so on. And most of them died during the experiment. One of the most famous transgressors in this, Dr. Joseph Mengele, he was nicknamed as the Angel of Death. Because what he did, he did things that are unthinkable. For example, he made an experiment. He took identical twins. He infected one of them with a germ, and he wanted to see how is the body defends itself against germs. So when the one who was infected with the germ died, he took the other twin and he sacrificed him, and he compared the internal organs of the two, especially the lymphoid tissues and so on, at autopsy, which was a very terrible thing to do. So after Germany lost the war, then came the Nuremberg trial, and this is the doc where the defendant physicians went on trial. About 18 of them were sentenced in that. Now, they were not alone in their transgression. The famous Tuskegee syphilis study happened in the United States. The United States Public Health Services, which is a government institute, they went to a poor area where American farmers, mainly black farmers, were recruited for studying the natural history of untreated syphilis. This was in 1930, and this was before there was effective treatment. As a matter of fact, at that time, syphilis was treated with salts of either arsenic or mercury, which was very toxic. So they wanted to see, well, are the people dying from our treatment, or are the people dying from the natural history of the disease, which is a justifiable question. So they took 400 men and their families, and then they told them they are being taken care of because they had bad blood. No treatment was given to them, but they just followed the progression of the disease from primary to secondary to tertiary syphilis. However, here's the catch. Penicillin was a standard treatment in the 1950s. And they continued the study without offering treatment to those until 1972. The study was leaked to the press, and there was a lot of uproar. These are the patients being tested for bad blood. They even had lumbar puncture, and the CSF was tested for tertiary syphilis. And this is the cartoons that appeared in the newspapers. Ignore this patient. This is a syphilis patient, experiment in progress. And then it says, now we can give him penicillin because he died. It remained until 1997, when this is the last survivor of this experiment. He accepted President Clinton's apology in 1997. Now, if we look at research, there is a lot of things that are available from technical standpoint. However, the interest of the researcher does not cover all what is feasible technically. He has some certain ideas that he wishes to pursue. However, here comes the law. Not all his wishes are in accordance with the law. He has to measure that against the law. However, not everything that is legal is ethical. So we have on top of all of these circles, the things that are ethical and legal from the researcher's wishes that are available technically. These are the things that can be pursued in research. Why does research violations happen, such as what happened in Tuskegee, what happened in World War II, and so on? Researchers are always enthusiastic about their own ideas. Many treat their ideas as their favorite children. And there is, again, the gain of hope, fame, media attraction, and so on. And also, anybody who is in an academic position, he is under pressure to publish or perish. And he wishes to be promoted through a long curriculum vitae. And there are some financial hopes as well if he discovers something that will be translated into a drug or so on. And there is frequently some lax implementation of the ethical regulations. And finally, there is the blinding ambition that leads investigators to make violations. Now, the unethical conduct of research can affect the participants or can affect the product of the research, which is the context and the results. And that is called fraud. So participants, they should be protected by informed consent, while the context is protected by preventing fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. I think Dr. Adlan will be talking more in details about all of these. This is a researcher who enters the nursery and conducts experiments on static electricity at night when nobody's watching him. Now, oversight offices in the United States are two different offices. There is the office that protects the research participants. It's called the Office of Human Research Protection. And there is the publication office that is Office of Research Integrity, which Dr. Adlan is going to talk about. Now, the definition of misconduct, سوء التصرف, it's the behavior by a researcher, intentional or not, that falls short of the good ethical and scientific standard. While deceit, أو الغش, is intention to cause others to regard as true something that is not true. The Office of Research Integrity defined the misconduct as falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism. The literal definition of fraud is the wrongful criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain, while deceit is the action or practice of deceiving someone by concealing or misrepresenting the truth. That's from the Oxford Dictionary. The fabrication in the USA definition is making up data out of the thin air or make up results or recording or reporting them which do not exist. While falsification, there are data, but you can manipulate it, you can change, but you can omit the outliers and so on in order to make it look better on your results. Plagiarism, or الانتحال, is to take something that is personal idea or personal information and to claim it for yourself. Research misconduct does not include, of course, honest error or difference in opinion and so on. So after this introduction, we'll come to some examples. Let's take example number one. William Sorlin, who was a dermatologist, immunologist at Sloan Kettering. Sloan Kettering is a well-known cancer center in New York. He reported that he could transplant tissue from genetically unrelated animals. How? He thought that he can make the tissue forget its ancestry by keeping the tissue from the donor in culture for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, he thought it's enough for the culture to forget its nature, its immunogenicity. However, a technician noticed that the transplanted patches were actually drawn on the skin with a marker that you can remove them with alcohol. So this was a very embarrassing type of example. Example number 2, the US Army Inspector General, he looked into the LSD experiment. LSD, as you know, it's a hallucinogen, and it was tested in the Army Research Unit, and there was startling lack of consistency in the interpretation of the regulations that suspend that. This is what I said about the attraction by the media and so on. This is a Korean investigator that he was titled as the hope for the world, and that he will bring health to the whole world. As a matter of fact, a postage stamp was made in his name, how he can make people who are disabled in wheelchair up and running. So his name was Woo Suk Hwang. He made research on transgenic pig for human transplantation. He did for bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease. He did some research on cattle and so on. In 2005, he claimed that he had produced embryonic stem cells from adult cells by somatic cell nuclear transplant or transfer. However, this potentially opened new ways to treat diseases that are degenerative diseases where cells are dying. You can put new stem cells and they can grow. However, he fabricated much of his research, and he was tried for that. This is a researcher from Iowa State, Dong Pyu Han. In 2015, he falsified data to make experiment on HIV vaccine look effective. As a matter of fact, until now, there is no effective vaccine for HIV, but everybody was looking for something like that, and such noise can catch the attention of media, and he can have a lot of fame. He was sentenced to 57 months in prison in July 2015. Another example, and this is an important example, Jim Wilson. He was the president and a major shareholder in a company called Genova, the new gene. It developed the gene therapy for ornithine tricarboxylase deficiency. This is a genetic disease that causes adolescents to go into renal failure gradually. And the company made an adenovirus vector to carry the gene. So he was responsible for a clinical trial for gene therapy at the University of Pennsylvania, but he failed to report that when he did it in animal studies, there were severe adverse reactions. So he went through and tried it on humans. Second thing, he went to a young man called Jesse Gelsinger. He was 18 years and he was starting to get sick with renal failure. He gave him high dose of the engineered virus, adenovirus. He injected it in the hepatic artery. He developed severe either infection or immune response, and he died. His experiment caused a stop on all genetic treatment for several years until regulations caught up with the advances in science. Another example, again, to see how it affects the general public. Andrew Wakefield, he was from UK. He told them that he gave a paper that autism was linked to MMR vaccine, which is given to most children. And that caused people to shun away from vaccination, and a lot of people started having movements against vaccine and so on. There was selective reporting of data, but more importantly, he was found guilty of conflict of interest. He had received money from lawyers that were looking for linking the vaccine and autism. So he was bought by these lawyers to make this quote unquote scientific discovery. Another example, Simon Chauvin. He was a British epileptologist, researcher. The Singapore government recruited him to head the National Neuro Institute in Singapore. He started, thinking that he's in a developing country, so he can do whatever he can. He took blood samples from patients for DNA analysis, did not tell them why the blood was being taken. Actually, he asked some patients with Parkinson's disease to stop their treatment and endangered them, exposing them to possible hyperthermia and so on. Singapore Medical Council found him guilty of professional misconduct across international borders, and he was removed from heading the National Neurological Institute. The British Medical Council, General Medical Council, decided to drop their own inquiries on Chauvin because they said that there are no grounds for action. As a matter of fact, this reflects a little bit of nationalism and racism. Now, are these problems just recent? No, in the old history, there had been several misconduct. Isaac Newton may have adjusted the calculations to fit his observations. George Mendel, the priest that was known for his research on inheritance, he said that they said that his pea plants were cleaner than what it was observed experimentally, indicating that he had polished the data. Louis Pasteur failed in his studies to cite that he had used vaccine against anthrax that was made by a competitor. He had no business in promoting his competitor. Anybody knows who this person is? This is Roger Bacon. Roger Bacon, as this plaque says, he is a philosopher, he is Dr. Mirabilis, and Dr. Mirabilis, al-Ustad al-Ra'i'. He is actually, as we are going to see, he is a champion of plagiarism. So he lived between 1220 and 1292. And he was a Franciscan priest. And what he did, he wrote a major book. And that major book he presented to Pope Clement IV. And he called it Opus Majus, the Grand Optical Book. As a matter of fact, this was plagiarized, the whole book, from Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham lived about 200 years earlier than him. His book actually was translated into Latin. And Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham, who's called in Latin literature as Al-Hazan, actually he had several drawings in the book. His book, Roger Bacon's book, was literal translation, and actually some drawings were also completely copied. So he takes the first prize for plagiarism. Other forms of misconduct, like failing to get ethical approval, failing to do informed consent, or falsifying, backdating the consent, withholding the results against which may be against the researchers or the sponsor's interest, not recording side effects, not declaring missing data. omitting outliers or not declaring outliers, not reviewing pre-existing research before conducting the research, gift authorship, you're my friend, I will put your name on the paper that I'm writing. That's called gift authorship, that's misconduct. Redundant publication or not disclosing conflict of interest. And finally, most respected journals want authors to fulfill all three conditions. Number one, anyone who's written as an author should have substantial contribution to conception, design, acquisition of data, analysis, or interpretation. That means he did real work. Or he drafted the manuscript, revised it critically for important intellectual content, or he worked on final approval of the version to be published. Now, what do journals do? This is the last slide. If there is misconduct, they will retract it. When it was conclusively shown that the article contains data that was fake or plagiarized or done without ethical approval. Retraction tells the reader to ignore that article altogether. Or the journal may express concern that the article may contain fake data or had been plagiarized, but when it was investigated, the results of investigating were inconclusive. So they just show expression of concern. Finally, if there is an honest mistake, they will publish a correction. As a matter of fact, if he had disregarded part of the article or asking the reader that this part of the article may not be completely true and so on. So I would stop here and thank you for listening.